right. So today, I had some more DAO related questions for Drew and for the rest of the team. Um, what I could never understand, and I've been in the space for quite some time, and was dealing with people who have invested, running bid angels, people who have invested in the launch of Ethereum. I completely understand why Bitcoin launched the way it did and why Ethereum launched the way it did, but why do we have 10,000, uh, you know, tokens that have been launched? 95% of them are sort of layer one or layer two networks. Why has that happened, do you think, historically? And what's going to possibly happen with that space? I'll ask Drew if he maybe
Oh, there
has
we go.
thought.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
was muted. Yeah, I mean, I think we all know that there some tokens have been overcreated. Um, I think there's a tendency for people to want to create a token for just about everything, and it's not always the right thing to do. Um, One of the options that we've looked at for our DAO, our software, is instead of having ownership of a token, you actually will get an NFT as a member, and it's a non-transferable NFT. So that way you get assigned that NFT. It's unique to your wallet. It can't be moved around, and so it becomes a unique identity. And in some ways, it's better because you instead of having you know a regular sort of token that you can have in your wallet, um, which can also sort of hide that human layer, right? Because you could have multiple wallets with tokens in them, and you could then be like 3 or 4 members in the DAO and increase your voting. So there's issues with that as well. Uh, so I don't, if there's not a true utility to the token, I personally don't see why create a token. There are other ways to go about it.
And if would you define utility here? Um, it's a layer one or layer two network, so there are people maintaining the network and developing the network, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So is that enough of a utility to just have thousands of tokens dealing with that one utility type function?
I guess it depends what is happening on that network. You know, sometimes there is value for exchanging a token. There are a lot of use cases for using tokens. There's a reason why we have an ERC20 and those type of definitions because creating your own token can add value to a framework. One of the things that we've been doing with Stacks is they have Miami Coin, um, and it's a really cool model that they came up with. So, does Miami need a cryptocurrency? Maybe not. But what they came up with, maybe not a priori, I should say, but what they came up with was, um, this ability to you mine, right? And the way that mining is done is through contributions. Stacks has this verifiable random function, so it will randomize and pick a winner from all the contributors to the mining to each block that's being mined, and it will reward, based on where they are in the sort of phase of coin issuance, um, a, a number of coins to that address that won the mining bid for that block. Now all these coins go into a treasury. 30% of them are allocated towards Miami that Miami can spend, assuming Miami takes the wallet, which they have not done yet. But if and when they do, they will then have this, and I think it's up to about $3 million now. Um, they can use that money to do what they want. In fact, we're building a DAO around this so that if you're a Miami coin holder, you have the right to propose ideas to spend on it. And then the rest of the 70% is used to as a DeFi play so that anyone with Miami coin can then stack that Miami coin and earn interest on it. So there's an example, and then any use case could come up of what you might want to use that Miami coin for. So there are cases where you can make use of it, but sometimes it's extraneous or there's not really a need.
Just to address the question of why everything is tokens, tokens, tokens. Um, I mean, if we're talking about layer one and layer two, that's pretty much everything out there. So layer one is any blockchain that is public where you actually need a token to incentivize the collaboration between all the strangers. So the token is the way you incentivize through either mining or staking, etc. So you're going to need a token regardless. If you issue a token on top of
Hey,
one
Drew,
of those,
can you unmute yourself by any chance? Thanks.
so
Sorry, Daniel.
no, no worries. So if we then talk about like projects that issue tokens on existing blockchains, is also the same idea. The problem is that, and this is usually a controversial point, so I'm expecting a lot of people to then like question this. But in general, we talk about blockchain as a technology. Blockchain itself is the technology that allows collaboration between a lot of distributed parties, etc. Public blockchains is a very specific use case within the world of blockchain. For many people in the general public, the ones that are not involved in information blockchains, public blockchains are the end all and that's it. But in reality, public blockchains are optimized for one thing and one thing only: transferring tokens. So in a world where you have our hammers and nails, the only thing you can have are tokens because that's what those blockchains do. You cannot hold amounts of data on the blockchain. Even storing variables becomes cumbersome or expensive. So everything you have to somehow shoehorn it into a token structure, and that's why you have tokens for everything. This is now when people attack me for attacking public blockchains.
No, but
No,
maybe to clarify the nomenclature. So coins are the native reward mechanism of a layer one. That's the correct terminology in that regard. And any token at the end of the day is just a standardized smart contract, right? Similar to how your $5 node is just a standardized contract as well. I think that's largely still not quite understood.
Agreed. And actually, I really found fascinating what Drew mentioned of actually having a DAO where they have NFTs that are unmovable, because that's probably the very first example I've heard of the use of a token that does not behave as a token. Instead, it actually behaves as a literal identity, as the way it should be, that you cannot move it. So I love that example. And Drew, actually, it would be great to understand then how does the governance of such a DAO evolve? Because by their nature, DAOs usually people come in and come out. But if the identities are immovable, then how is it meant to be that then the people involved is a static set?
Well, you can reissue these NFTs and you can revoke NFTs through consensus, right? So if you want to have another member, um, you would vote for that person in, and then if there's consensus to allow them into the DAO, then they would be issued their token. Um, the exception of that process, at least in how we're conceiving of it, would be at the onset of a DAO. So when you first create sort of the DAO instance, then you would be able to issue all the original tokens for the founding DAO members. But after that, it's a consensus to either revoke someone's NFT, or I don't know if you'd actually remove it or just sort of invalidate their wallet to be able to authorize into voting.
And then the funds that this particular DAO is holding, they are, I guess, like in Ether or some other like tradable token or coin.
Yeah, exactly. So we're building on the Stacks platform, so they'd probably be in either STX or Bitcoin, um, and then that would be held within the contract, and then again, the smart contract of the DAO would be able to move that treasury. No one else would be able to move it. People could contribute, but they wouldn't be able to move it, and the moving of it would also require consensus.
um, So, in terms of some of the other discussion we had today in the salon, we were also talking about a variety of ways that stable coins are used. And I think, David, you had a question, so I'm going to let you go with your question next.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Don't you remember that ad? uh, well, two questions, but one first quick one because I came in late. I had some trouble getting in. Christian made an interesting point. So you were talking about your clients that you're going to have a call with later today. In the case of the records, so let's say you get the record and it's scratched. How do you solve that dispute to get your money back?
Well, with all of those systems, ultimately you need to have a reliable reputation system attached to this, right? And I mean, we have learned that lesson from the dark markets. They worked despite that you didn't have a nation state recourse. They simply worked on the fact that you had a reputation attached to whoever was selling weed or something else that you were buying on these dark markets. So that's still a necessity.
And how would you propose to establish that trust? Do you have some kind of an insurance guarantee against disputes or something?
I honestly have given it very very little thought
Oh,
at
okay.
this point in time. And again, it's not like I mean we're VC, right? So we'll put our own ideas out there, but then we just vet the ideas on a daily basis that people bring to us. Right?
Okay. Well, the larger question that I'd like to throw out to the group is because I'm involved with some discussions now with a platform that I'm concepting. How what, so I see that there is some need for a centralized, trusted database of whatever it is that you're putting on the platform that somewhat like an oracle, I suppose, or something. But the problem we find ourselves now in this world is agreeing on an actual fact. And how do you present that? And it seems to me that somewhere building the bridge between fiat and, tokenized crypto, whatever, coin based, you need that trusted source that it cannot be refuted, whether by consensus because maybe 20 of 25 believe Trump, whatever. Uh, how do you see that coming in the near future? Is there any movement toward or concepting or understanding around a centralized immutable source for as a referee, if you will, versus the complete decentralization and supposedly trustless, but is it really? So it's kind of a conceptual question I throw out if anyone's thinking on these terms.
So I think that's actually like a great. It depends on the data that we're talking about. But if it's something where like everybody needs to depend on a set of data, the first thing that you need to keep in mind is who are the publishers of that data and who are the subscribers. And then of course the publishers need to be vetted. So this would be kind of like a proof of authority type of situation, or some type of KYC party that is the one that has the relevant cryptographic key to push information to the database. Then the other problem is that if you want to do this completely on the blockchain and not depend on off-chain resources, on a public blockchain is extremely expensive to store data. So that's actually a great use case for permission blockchains, and permission blockchains that actually can have massive amounts of data. So to give you a real life example, since February of 2019, so we're going on 2.5 years now, Vanguard has been using a Symbiont-based blockchain that stores financial index data. And these are gigabytes of data that are ingested by the blockchain every single day, published by the financial index providers. And then Vanguard uses this to rebalance what has grown now to over 2 trillion worth of assets. So essentially, we have one of the largest asset managers rebalancing 2 trillion worth of passive index funds, relying solely on the data that is pushed to this permission blockchain based database. So it again, it depends what the data that you need people to know about, what is it, what's the nature. In this example that I gave you, it makes a lot of sense for it to be. It can actually live on a permission blockchain that allows massive amount of data. If you're talking more about traditional oracles in the sense of like betting and stuff, then potentially you could have a set of oracles that look at the outside world and can then all agree on what the external data is. You may not necessarily have it on the blockchain. So it really depends on the use case. Because the main limitation with public blockchains is that storing data is expensive. Unless of course you just want to publish a hash and then rely
Yeah.
on an off-chain resource, which opens a whole other kind of worms.
No, blockchain should never store any data, period, full stop. And specifically, if when where you're attaching any form of PII to it, you're actually invalidating the herd immunity of the chain. That's an enormous confusion. And what you're referring to, these DLTs are just shared databases.
Uh, no, actually, so indeed there are a lot of permission blockchains that
That
break
is
away from
that's a
the.
non sequitur. That's like saying my private internet. It's a
No,
facility.
no, you're completely
The
wrong on that.
openness
So
is
first of all,
is the key
let me correct
criteria
on that,
of a
because the issue is
blockchain.
that first of all, you're bundling all permission blockchains into DLTs. DLTs is the generalized term that includes blockchain-based like DLTs and blockchain-inspired DLTs. If we talk about a blockchain like the one that Symbian has, which is permission and sticks actually to the replicated state machine model of a blockchain, that is a true blockchain.
No.
We are talking about a blockchain, a DLT. I'm telling you how it works. There is a global book that everybody has access to. When you're talking about something like Corda or Fabric,
Right.
where you have node to node individual sharing, that is no longer a replicated state machine. That breaks away from that model. Symbian sticks to the replicated state machine model, and that's also why a lot of other things are possible in Symbian, because it's actually closer to what you experience in the global book that you see in public blockchains.
Yeah, the confusion here is always the same. It's the confusion between blockchain and blockchain technology. So one blockchain technology is a particular type of encryption. Blockchain is an open permissionless digital bearer instrument creator, right? So that was the invention of the Bitcoin white paper. The other things existed long before the Bitcoin white paper was
No,
published.
but that's not true. The Bitcoin white paper does not mention the word blockchain.
It doesn't.
It's
No,
exactly.
it references the paper that created that particular mechanism in its second footnote. But the paper itself, yes, also doesn't reference the term.
So at least in my case, I define a blockchain as a replicated state machine, where you have multiple nodes, where none of them are the master, and none of them are the surrogate nodes, but everybody is able to share the same state or the same data without necessarily copying from each other.
Can you
So by
create,
that,
well, does that create immutable transaction, or is any of the parties that can be coerced to reverse a transaction?
it's not possible to reverse like for example in a Symbian blockchain, which sticks to that segregated sorry to that replicated state machine. It's just like a regular blockchain. All the different nodes are a flat structure. All the nodes are the same. No single node can change something,
But all the
because they would have to
operators are
modify.
known.
All the operators are known, yes. So
Yeah,
if all the
yeah. So
operators
you
decide,
can, yeah, you can reverse a transaction. Yeah,
you cannot
at the point
reverse
in
it,
time.
but you can all decide unanimously to enter a transaction that is the opposite of the transaction that you want to invalidate. So you're not erasing it. You're just adding one to change it. That is not the same.
Yeah, you can't actually receive physical transaction finality, which is the key component of a blockchain. And
Well,
that's
but
what
actually, if we're
separates it
talking
from
about
shared databases, right?
no, but actually, we're talking about finality. Then, I mean, public blockchains, most of them, all the ones that have proof of mining and proof of stake, they're probabilistic. You need to introduce some type of classical consensus to actually have absolute finality. That's one of the big issues with public blockchains, and one of the reasons why financial institutions don't want to touch public blockchains for anything that is like their actual core processes.
So this brings us to one of the articles we had in our newsletter, which we send out every Sunday, which talks about the fact, can DeFi stay decentralized? And I think there may be some varying opinions here in the group, but at the moment, DeFi is launching using stable coins that, Juan was discussing earlier. That Circle actually is providing sort of rails to get the DeFi going. Can DeFi actually long term stay decentralized? And what do you guys think?
It can, but it's actually going to stay decentralized in the extreme. And what I mean by this is the regulators have started to take a very aggressive stance on against banking-like transactions happening on blockchains by DeFi protocols. Essentially, a DeFi protocol lends money, which is a banking activity that it should be regulated. In general, the regulators come after institutions that are doing this without a license. In the case of DeFi, there's no centralized entity to come after. However, the activity itself is illegal. If Christian and I are on a DeFi protocol and I'm lending tokens to him and he's earning a return, we are both engaged in illegal activity. Of course, the SEC or the CFTC are not going to come after two random individuals, but they can come against BlockFi, like it's starting to happen. They can come against well-known hedge funds in the space that may want to brag that they are doing DeFi investments. So indeed, the participants, if they're prominent enough, they can be attacked by the regulators, which means DeFi can actually stay decentralized, but again, in the extreme, because the moment you actually have well-known institutions adopting it, at least given the current stance from the regulators are going to come after them just for the sole reason of participating, not enabling or facilitating. Simply be a party to the transaction is illegal. Like an example of how this is the case, it's kind of like if whether you are consuming cocaine or selling cocaine, it is illegal either way. The same thing is with DeFi. You cannot perform banking operations without a license.
But even today, I think the article was referring to the fact that Uniswap was restricting access to certain tokens to investors on the network, after hitting a billion in volume, etc. And so this was in response to the threats from the regulators. So even if Uniswap, cannot allow free trading on its DEX, do you think this will kind of happen to all of the DeFi?
Oh, but then instead of just trading on Uniswap, you can just start having them trade on a bunch of different venues and farther just fragment it all over the place.
That's what I think will happen. That there's just too many DEXs launched and being launched. So if you start restricting the largest ones, as you pointed out, or the ones that the regulators can go after, how do you restrict all of it?
You
Yeah, you
don't.
can't. You just can't. That's the easy thing. You can only come after the big well-known players. So I don't think DeFi is stoppable. It will continue, and the innovation is going to keep going. It's going to be amazing, with the caveat that the dream of institutional adoption doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense for the regulatory standpoint, and doesn't make sense from the point of view that the financial institutions that people want to adopt this are actually the ones getting disintermediated by this technology.
There's a couple of challenges here that the industry needs to figure out so that we don't play whack-a-mole forever. Because we've been doing this for 30, 40 years with anti-piracy, with illegal copying of things, pick an illegal topic that's been online and it's been whack-a-mole. The thing that we're having the benefit of right now is, early technology, tokens going up in value, people want to swap the old thing for the next hottest thing because I think it's going to go up in value more. And if you can't find one spot to do it, there's a new Scott swap to do it tomorrow, right? It's not hard to build one of these swappers. But the thing is, you can almost never get the money out. And this is where the regulatory folks have the biggest lever right now, is in the money out side of things. The kind of interesting thing is most people have accepted that Bitcoin can go someplace that's a regulated exchange and get converted back to whatever fiat you like. And if you try hard enough, you can basically convert anything to something along the way and get it into Bitcoin. It just sucks to do so. It's really hard. But this banking lever is really interesting. And I think there's going to be a much bigger hurdle that folks are going to throw up, because willy-nilly DeFi is not going to be allowed to exist, swapping anything for anything, and grow large enough. The taxation people are going to have their say in it, is sort of my opinion here. And I think that's okay. I think what it's up to us as technologists is to figure out a fair way of account. Is it fair that I pay my local jurisdiction taxes because I made 500% selling an ape NFT? Maybe it's fair. Maybe it's not fair. But that's kind of the rule I accepted when I decided to be a citizen of the United States. And maybe that needs to be put in the protocol so we stop getting unregulated. I mean, one of the projects I was involved in the past was, how do we play by the rules but still allow things like forfeiture of assets when you're a criminal? Like, shouldn't that be a thing? Like, should we really allow willy-nilly anything for anything trading across border? Really? Like, I don't think so. I think we need some kind of guardrails.
I think a lot of what you're saying makes sense, but it just goes against the ethos of the blockchain arena. It's like if you design a protocol in which it automatically withhold taxes and it allows some uh, authority to come in and like move assets, people are just not going to use it, especially the people that would be subject to those type of forfeitures and taxes. So it's like, I like the way you're thinking. I just think the whole community wouldn't go for it like wholesale.
Yeah, I think that when we say the term whole community, we're talking about 1% of the 1% of the 1% that actually care. Of 7 billion people, yeah, lots of them own crypto now, but you know, it took me a whole weekend to figure out how to use some of these swappers. There's no way, normal non-technologists are going to ever try and figure this out. If somebody comes up with something that does automatically work out these kinks, and it works at the store, and it's at a bank, and you can move it around, and there's a card, and it's not called Mariana coin, and you're swapping it for Scott coin, I mean, that one will probably just win because of ease of use. Right now, I think we're just experimenting, which is why there's so many of these. But at some point, there's going to be just integrated in my banking browser, swap this for this, and it'll be called Forex, and it'll just to have 10,000 things in the list instead of 281.
Yeah, I think that points to one important thing. So the current state of what we call DeFi is very experimental, but the larger point here is we're calling it decentralized finance. At the end of the day, I would call it's the definancialization of the real world economy, right? So currently we are assigning maybe 13.5% of GDP to this activity, and we're in the process of right sizing it. Kind of, if you go back in time, most people don't even remember that we needed to pay phone minutes by the minute, right? And now everybody has an unlimited plan.
Yeah.
We still allow this to happen with our financial activity. And to me, I've always been saying, well, for some time now, that's the equivalent of putting stamps on your email if someone gets to charge you to move bytes around, right? That's absolutely nonsensical from a technology perspective. So to that extent, my expectation is that within the advanced economies, we will simply right size the financial sector to hopefully be something that's less than 1% of GDP, because it's really a penalty on productive activity. You can automate most of these functions at this point in time fairly trivially. And what we're already seeing, obviously, is that wallets are competing on yield for stablecoins, which mitigates against the most important concern that people have with fiat. So unless your CBDC does that, people will continue to do that and more and more. But the larger point there is ultimately everything will go into plumbing. Right now we
Yep.
kind of have open plumbing, but yeah, most people obviously don't care to buy the next gobbledygook token. That's why the entire space is really a multi-massive online player game still. Whenever you want to breach into real world economic activity, yes, you're subsequent to these on and off ramps, and they oftentimes invalidate the necessary herd immunity of the DeFi system entirely, right? As soon as you have certain participants that you can identify, it doesn't matter if you do everything right. If your counterparty doesn't, then they can identify you. And so that's why our new lens for any application, any dApp, any solution within that space has been that it cannot be observed. And so the point there being is, so we just started to volunteer for an NGO that's serving specifically dissidents in countries where they are being prosecuted and persecuted by their governments. And so, in order to get information to them and get funds to them, they have to be completely undetectable. So, any developer at this point in time that's still putting out solutions that in some shape or form attach PII to their application, to their function, they in essence are endangering these type of people. But ultimately, that's how everybody should be thinking anyway. Everybody should completely be hidden unless there's an actual legal requirement for that. And even then, you just want to pass on what I call green check marks, right? So the
Yeah.
important thing to understand is blockchains are not an end all be all. They have a very, very narrow use case within the within the Web3 stack, right? Ultimately, most things have to exist simply as cryptographic primitives, specifically if they speak to anything that people call identity. So anything that's certification, identification, verification, and so forth. Think new government credentials. There cannot be copies floating around because that is the reason why we have all these externality from legacy database systems, because you cannot protect copies in this form, right? And that's my point with blockchains have the particular purpose of moving bytes from A to B. The purpose of the ledger in this context is largely misunderstood. That's an option, but it's typically not needed and or should be handled differently. You should not attach any data to a database directly.
Yeah.
To a
What's
database, to a blockchain, I mean, sorry.
just one comment here, and we might have a question, but the interesting part about this is philosophically, if you're like, hey, of course you live somewhere, of course you're a human being, you should probably pay some token of appreciation to your local people to keep your street up. Let's call that 10% for sake of conversation. If magically 10% of anything you earned just went into a pot and you never had to think about it ever, that might be kind of useful because it would just happen and everybody just knew it would happen. It would just be part of existing. And I think if we acknowledge that, yeah, it's probably fair that everybody just kicks in their portion, and take the emotion out of it, then we get into automation and we can correct the variables in the automation. And I think we're getting to some of that point now, where we've
What
accepted automation can do this, not people.
Yeah, I mean, there's some structural problems to that. I mean, that mostly have to do with how we implemented taxation globally, right? Because we are largely penalizing production. If you think of income tax, for example, right? That's utterly nonsensical. And the proposal for a flat tax on consumption has been around since the 80s, and that's the obvious correct model, and that you can easily build in, right? So whenever you need to have a payment function and it's for something that you're consuming and that's taxable, yes, you should automatically defer a part of that to mitigate against any externalities that this particular purchase has, right? This could be like 10% for buying junk food, goes to finance the healthcare system and so forth, right? But the way we've been doing it right now is we created all these kind of more or less random taxation of a lot of productive activity. And I don't think that can withstand ultimately the decentralization of global economic activity, because all of that now is no longer bound, unless it's an actual in-person service, is no longer bound to any particular nation state. And even if it is, you can still set up the appropriate legal structures. And I expect a lot of wallets to actually implement those. And I'm surprised to not see those to actually mitigate against these things automatically, because it's kind of the next step of the robo advisor, right? To also set you up with the right legal structure in order to mitigate any penalties that some local government or nation state wants to apply to you. And
And do
needless to say, enterprises already do that, right? That's why Amazon pays 0% tax effectively.
so that's really interesting question here is why out of all of the different issues that one can look at in terms of uh, regulating DeFi. Do you think that the new SEC chairman, Gary Gensler, is going after stable coins in order to kind of like prevent the rails and the onboarding here? I think that's what kind of Juan was implying. That's what, the USDC was used for. Do you think that's the reason why he's going after the stable coins and saying that they are really pegged to traditional currencies and therefore could be securities that he has sort of the SEC actually governs over?
I think the deal with stablecoins is that, well, first of all, there's many different types of stablecoins, from the algorithmic ones that just regulate their supply to maintain a peg, to the ones that are crypto backed like DAI. But then you also have the ones like Tether, which is a random third party that decides that they want to create a coin, and then you have to trust them, but they're gonna put that money in a bank. And then you have the ones issued directly by a commercial bank, so now at least you're trusting bank money. And then you have the ones that is commercial banks backing them with reserves inside of a central bank, and in the limit, the ideal stablecoin is one that is issued directly by a central bank, so CBDC. So within that whole spectrum of stablecoins, they're not all built the same. And what is going on recently is that it's become very clear that a lot of these stablecoins are actually not holding a one-to-one ratio in the reserves against these coins. Um, Part of the reason for that is that it's not even a viable business model to do so, because interest rates are so low. You don't have a euro stablecoin, at least not as far as I know, because in Europe, interest rates are still negative. So you wouldn't be able to just hold euros and generate a profit. So the issue right now is that a lot of these companies then have switched the reserves to include non-cash and cash equivalent instruments, and in some cases even hold corporate bonds and other stuff. So essentially, they are no longer the one-to-one bank that they were claiming to be, and it's actually becoming almost like a fractional system, which is not what they were intended to be. So I think that's what Gensler is trying to come against, because then you're creating all these coins that are the stable coins that don't really are fully backed, and that is a huge risk if those things are a get too big, and then b suddenly unwind when people realize there's nothing behind them.
And it's probably one way to go after DeFi because a lot of it is using stable coins as an infrastructure.
But you have perfectly good coins that are, more on the regulated side. If you're talking about like Circle, sorry, USDC by Circle, or Paxos, or even Gemini coin, those are more legit coins than when you start talking about stuff like Tether, which is kind of like the elephant in the room that is definitely not backed one to one.
Yeah, that makes
I
sense. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I definitely think there is also some risks in DeFi, just because if you look at DAI reserves, a lot of that is actually even backed by USDC, right? So I think the point you make, Daniel, is super strong in the fact that the business model for a lot of these stable coins is to back themselves with cash equivalents or even corporate bonds that they end up making some interest income in. And it's a lot of the movements that we see coming very recently from Circle and Paxos specifically, that they want to go 100% cash, primarily for both pressure from the market that wants to know that the asset is liquid and can be pegged to the dollar 1 to 1, and also pressure from regulators that want to make sure that this isn't becoming some kind of money market or something that they can regulate. So it's a super interesting conversation, and something that we're going to see develop over the course of the next few months, I would say, because the regulators are definitely highly interested in figuring out ways of how to regulate this.
And
And
just
there
to
are,
say, yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
sorry, I was just going to mention there are viable business models behind these stable coins. Right now, because of the low interest rates, just holding reserves and earning a spread on that is earning the interest on that is not a model. There's definitely a business model, which is kind of like, for example, what Circle is doing with USDC. There's two things that Circle has been pivoting over the past year. Number one, they are now charging for API access. So they've created a lot of different integrations with different payment rails for USDC. And then they charge for the use of their APIs to use their payment rails. So it's one source of revenue. The other one is actually through the so something that Circle does, they issue bonds for investors to raise capital. Then they, with that capital, they mint new stable coins, so new USDC, that then they lend out to hedge funds and crypto asset managers for quick transactions. So like these are loans that charge a high interest rate, but they're just for quick transactions. So that's just another way in which they can actually make money. So
Okay,
you
we
don't
lost
always
you.
have to make money just out of your interest on your one-to-one reserves.
Sorry, we
Oh,
lost that
sorry.
last
Just
comment.
to summarize, the two ways that they can make money is through charging for their APIs and through the issuance of bonds to fund the issuance of more stable coins that then they lend out to crypto funds.
That makes sense. There were a bunch of articles about NFTs. We'll have like 10 minutes to discuss them. Um, CryptoPunks blasts past 1 billion in lifetime sales as NFT speculation surges. So just as I would say, the regulatory bodies are trying to put their arms around regulatory issues surrounding DeFi, the NFTs are just on fire at the moment. Do you feel like this is going to continue? And does anyone have any thoughts about the regulatory issues surrounding NFTs? Well, I can tell you, I think it's going to continue because I've spent most of my career in digital media. And with NFTs, one can do 95% of the things that we imagined over the last 2 decades with interactivity in digital media. We had some presenters today. Actually, Avinash, you want to maybe say something about this? And, you will be joining us next time as a presenter at the Salon as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mariana. Yeah. So the it's all about the creator economy, right? So the NFTs create an opportunity for the creators to, especially the designers. So we work predominantly with fashion in the fashion space, and NFTs create that opportunity for designers to earn a recurring revenue, and even the brands. So we work with premium fashion brands, and when NFTs are traded, um, uh, and it creates opportunities for designers and brands to earn with every switching of hands bit of the asset, be it digital fashion or even physical. Um, so it's a new business model that it's enabling. um, there is obviously there's a lot of hype right now, um, but eventually things will settle down on core fundamentals of business, because certainly there's a business model building um, of a recurring revenue model for many industries, be it music or gaming and fashion. So that's what we are working on. Um, yeah, so that's my 2 cents about this space.
Mariana, I think that some of the areas that are going to be regulated or are going to be ripe for regulation involve how NFTs are going to be used. So if you issue somebody an NFT, does that mean that they can copy it and display it everywhere, like we saw with the Gorilla Yacht Club and Arizona Tea? So who's going to regulate what you can do with that NFT and how many times you can copy it and how you can share it? And I think that's one area. And I think another area is how do you prove that you actually have that NFT? How do you regulate that you've received the goods that you're supposed to? I think those are the two areas that are sort of nebulous right now and are likely to cause a lot of conflict. Scott, I'm guessing you got something to say.
Oh, I got lots of things to say because I like to put on the yeah, but hat on things like this. This is going to take lawyers. So, comment number one. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what just recently happened with not Scarlett Johansson. Was it Scarlett Johansson? Sued Marvel basically in my contract for Widow. It was you will have a wide studio release, and I will get a percentage of the movie studio take. But it went straight to streaming media, and now they're going to pay her less. So let's imagine that this is implemented in a smart contract, which says you will get magically paid in Marvel coin 5% of this and 10% of that. And then you just burn the contract somewhere along the way. You delete the key and it doesn't happen. You change the wallet address. You do something along the way to make it not automatically work. So at some point then somebody's going to say, hey, we had this thing deployed and you upgraded it. Pay me. And you say, no, I can't. It's broken. There's no way through that yet. That hasn't happened with a big enough case to basically say something that was deployed and verified is permanently a contract. There's always a settlement that comes out of these things. There's no way to do a settlement out of an automatic widget yet. And so first, my comment is that it will have to take that before somebody says, look, if you're doing a legally enforced contract, it has to be done with this recognized legal contract system. It has to be stored on that chain over there, and it has to be audited by 7 lawyer auditors, and then it's considered good. There's going to be some pattern that looks something like that. I know Vinay Gupta's project, his is trying to come up with legal contracts that are sort of audited by everybody and deployed once and usable. And stuff like that is what it's going to take before this becomes able to do these more percentage contractual things with it. I agree that this technology can do a lot of really cool things. I personally think that this X of 10,000 being suddenly worth $1 million is going to cool down, because I think at some point there's going to be so many copycats. It's going to be sort of like, I hate to call it Beanie Baby, but it's like the knockoff of the Beanie Babies. It's the knockoff of the knockoff of the knockoff of the knockoff. And that, waters down the whole ecosystem. So I think that's going to cool down a bit.
But I think you also have to look at, just to take music as an example, it's all about the enforcement. So if you have something with BMI and ASCAP, they have a very big club that they wield to against people who would copy. And eventually they have enough clout to get groups like YouTube to create algorithms to detect when their stuff is being stolen. But I'm wondering, as an artist, as a licensor, as somebody who's creating this stuff, you have the perception that your stuff is being protected, but if you don't have the big club, is it actually being protected?
Oh, but the big club is coming. Visa just bought a CryptoPunk, and Budweiser just bought one too. So the club is in, as they say.
Best marketing spend ever.
Yep. Yep.
People, best spend of crypto marketing dollars ever.
Yeah, and it keeps
It,
going, right? It's
and
going
you
to
know what?
keep going.
When it goes down in value, people will get resold again for $10 million, and somebody will take a $70 million tax write off, and it will be
Exactly.
great. But your point is the big guys. So none of this works. Let's talk about rights enforcement. If there's a global magic lookup table in the sky of all rights owned by everybody, this works magically. Until there's a global rights lookup engine in the sky, it doesn't work at all. So you need enough people to put rights in a global rights lookup table. Sure, it could be BMI or whoever. And then they need to strong arm the industry players to adopt it. Again, that's a legal thing or a contractual thing, right? Google wins because Google threatens to pull ad revenue. Google wins because Google will demonetize your stuff. Apple
Yep.
wins because they own the App Store. Like, they strong arm you to do it. They don't necessarily win with best tech. This, I think, has a chance because the tech is good, but it's going to require lots of strong arming by the people who are already there.
Yeah, the irony of it is that even though this is supposed to be decentralized, you're going to end up needing a centralized digital certificate authority or something like that.
Yep.
Uh, and,
Yep.
and
That's
with
the
respect,
irony for sure.
yeah, so there's that challenge, and with art, at least that's kind of like that's just one of the few challenges. There's also the issue that the token that you buy, it's a reference to an art that is stored somewhere else, so you need to make sure that that link is maintained, or else you get a token that says 404 file not found. But aside from that, if we go into the more innovative ways in which people are using tokens, for example, I don't know, tokenizing the revenues earned from the music rights or something, then now you're entering territory of selling securities, which is a whole other kind of worms with the regulators. And like Scott just mentioned, then paying the cash flows and ensuring that those revenues that were received in the real world are somehow funneled onto the wallets that own these NFTs. It's a whole other level of complexity, and
But
that's
Daniel, you're not
assuming that
even
they were sold as securities to
you're
begin
not
with, so they
even
wouldn't be
thinking about
illegal.
the funding that goes on of projects, right? You're just looking at like the payments. But if you think of the film projects and TV projects and music, albums that are being funded using NFTs right now, which I get like 3 a day to look at. I mean, that's a whole nother level of issue.
Yeah, exactly, and actually, like that is one of the big issues because if it's almost like by definition, if you're putting money into something that is not even built, it is very hard to argue that you're not putting money into it with the expectation of future profit. And on top of that is something that is going to be built by a third party. So it's a how we test line by line. So it's definitely a security. So if you raise money and you say that it's an NFT, call it whatever you want. It's gonna be probably like a security token is probably a better name for it. That's the challenge that's gonna happen if people start suddenly raising capital through NFTs, pretending that it's not an illegal ICO. That's gonna be an issue, and the regulators are gonna step in once more.
Yeah, it's tricky. I like to turn a conversation, and it's like, Scott's super duper rock band is selling 5,000 NFTs for $10 each, so I can go on tour and launch my new album. If you help me raise money and I become a top 100 artist, your token will be worth more money. My success is your gain, right? I don't know. Conversationally, that's not a security. Legally, it probably is, because you're expecting I'm really good at this. Um, so I think we have to maybe use some real world, or maybe some common sense in some of this, when we talk about what we're trying to control.
Yeah, I think there's more of a crowdfunding model to this that is probably a little safer from a security standpoint, right? If you are getting a direct NFT that you're going to resell and that's your game, that seems like that could be a security. Whereas a lot of the NFTs that I'm seeing in this space are more about you get access to this special seat in this digital concert and you get access to this artist at this time or you can win that seems a little less about financial gain and a little more of a crowdfunding Indiegogo kind of model to me.
Which is
Yeah,
regulated by the SEC, by the
Yeah,
way.
true. Good
yeah.
point.
If what you're getting is kind of like a souvenir, some type of like special benefit, that's totally fine. The actual
Yeah.
like kind of like the example that people like to cite because it has happened in the past is if I decide that I'm gonna build a golf club and I sell memberships to people based on this golf club that I'm going to build, that that is very likely going to be deemed as security because people are going to buy the memberships thinking that they can probably sell them later at a higher price once the golf club is complete. On the other hand, if the golf club is already complete and now I go and I sell memberships and it's like this is as is, and then based on the governance, maybe we'll add a second, like a second uh, back nine holes for the golf course, whatever, that will increase the value of the shares of the membership, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people got into the membership because they knew that the golf course was going to get extended. So this actually goes the same for a lot of DAOs. If a DAO raises money before they build something, then that could be a security. If the DAO actually, like, there's a system, it's in place, then the DAO is created, and then the governance passed on to the community, and it's like, here, take it as is. Now it's up to you to modify and expand it or do nothing with it. Then it's not a security. A lot of it is how you sell it and what's the expectation that is set up at the moment when you sell it. So if Scott's great band is sold as, I'm going to be the next rock star, that will likely be a security.
There is part of this which I kind of believe um, that you kind of can stop protecting the little guy. Like, that's the whole point of this, right? To protect uneducated investors and make sure there's a minimum level of criteria to allow people to be bilked if they're able to read the fine print. If you read all the if you have $250,000 and you read the fine print and then you lose all your money, it's fine because you should have known better because you had a bunch of money. What's kind of funny is there's a lot of uneducated investors who now are filthy rich because they sold the picture of a unicorn or an ape or a piece of pixel, who have more money than the people who are really good at investing in stocks. And they're not the ones that the rule intended to protect, which is why I think we need to sort of restate what we're trying to stop here. Of course, we're trying to stop people from getting taken advantage of and trying to level the playing field and offer information to everybody. So maybe that's a minimum, for all this stuff, there's like a minimum viable playing field. If you're launching this, it has to have this, and this. Otherwise, it's not investable. You can't stop that on the internet, but that's kind of where I think we should go, rather than limiting who can participate or how much you need to participate or if you're worthy of participation, um, to make this a little bit more fair.
And
Yeah,
there's
this
actually
is
like,
a I
if
actually have to kind of
oh
end
sorry.
today because we're already over time. This is such a great discussion. I think Jeanette brought crowdfunding into it, and as you go through like different forms of crowdfunding, you can see what is or isn't a security. She had a point about incentive crowdfunding versus equity crowdfunding, but a lot of the projects use both to fund, film and TV. So there's some, I would say, regulations out there that we can look at, like crowdfunding, that can give you an educated way of looking at this. But a lot of it has to be kind of created as we go. But we're at the way past our time. Usually try to keep it by 2:30. So maybe we can table some of this discussion for next Tuesday, Jeanette, when we do like ask your question day.
Sounds good.
Sounds good to you. And then, we can continue next Wednesday here in this creating unicorns discussion. I want to thank everyone. You were amazing speakers. I've learned so much from all of you. Thank you for being here today, and see you all next week.
Thanks, Mariana.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. Bye.